Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 159. Where is your learning edge? Some of you know that I deliver a TV show every Thursday evening UK time, and I was asked this question after my last show by one of the viewers, the lovely Mariah. This topic of conversation was so common when I was doing my MSc in Change Agent Skills and Strategies back in 2005, but hardly anyone asks me that question anymore, which is a shame because it's such a great question. So in this episode, I'm going to be exploring the whole notion of a learning edge, what it really means for we introverts, especially the ambitious amongst us, before looking at how to be at your edge without reaching burnout. The concept of the learning edge will be familiar to those who study psychology, to educationalists and to those in personal development fields. And it might be obvious, but for the sake of completeness, let me paint you a picture of what we're talking about here. And this is my picture. I suggest you paint your own. Imagine 3 concentric circles where the innermost is your comfort zone. We've talked about this in a few other episodes because I recognise the importance of a comfort zone to those, like we introverts, who often feel a lack of psychological safety. To add some colour to the picture, this is the warm, cosy, familiar place where you're surrounded by all of your favourite things and your favourite ways to recharge. Like me, you will love spending time in this comfort zone. At the perimeter of that comfort zone is the competency zone, where we're using our skills and knowledge. This begins to get a different feel and look to it because it's where we get productive, where we get into flow, where we get stuff done. So for me, this loses its coziness and becomes more functional. Just beyond the competency zone is where we find the learning edge. It's where we feel appropriately challenged because now we're in the territory of new knowledge, unmastered skills and potential failures. And I think it's this that unnerves introverts who may already feel not enough. This requires a reframe, a mental mindset shift to accept that we'll be making mistakes, and mistakes are plenty. Not because we're being lazy or careless, but because we've chosen to place ourselves in unknown territory. It's here that we're able to stretch ourselves but not break, and that distinction is important. American psychologist and philosopher William James used the term learning edge when writing about the importance of pursuing one's personal fringe of consciousness or the margin of life not yet explored. I love the use of the words fringe and margin here, as it implies the immediate and navigable edges, not the deep, dark unknown. More recently, educator and author Peter Senge introduced the concept in his book The Fifth Discipline, where he defined the learning edge as the area where an individual's current knowledge and understanding meets the limits of their current abilities, creating a gap that requires growth and development to overcome. So if we want to satisfy that very human need to learn and grow, it's that gap that we need to understand and not shy away from. This may be why the term has become a widely recognised and important concept in the field of personal growth and development. Let me finish painting that picture for you though, as it doesn't end at our learning edge. Slightly overlapping the learning edge and sprawling out into the far yonder is the anxiety zone and ultimately the danger zone. Out here, there is a high likelihood that we may become too stressed or too anxious, which will negatively impact our ability to effectively learn. I acknowledge that circumstances may force us into the anxiety and danger zone every now and again, but by and large, it's not a healthy zone for introverts to hang out in. I see posts almost on a daily basis telling us that nothing good happens inside our comfort zone. But bearing in mind the competency zone is at that outer perimeter, I strongly disagree with that statement. I think the flow state we experience in that outer competency zone is better than good. It's fundamental to good work and fulfillment in many ways. And we also need to rise to meet our learning edge if we're not going to become stale and even potentially irrelevant in today's fast-paced, high-tech world. What's really interesting for me is that painting this picture for myself has enabled me to update how I perceive my comfort zone. It also means I'm closer to agreeing with Neil Donald Walsh when he said, "Life begins at the end of your comfort zone." I still can't accept that life begins there, because that denigrates our peace and opportunities to recharge in the heart of our comfort zones. That's living too. But I can accept that growth starts at the edge of our comfort zone and hold at the same time that life is not always about growth. We need growth, but also we need periods of rest, reflection and recuperation before the next foray into the unknown. I've spoken about my favourite strategy for growing and developing in a sustainable way, and it has always been this: work at the outer edge of your comfort zone. Now we know this as the competency zone, and what I'm suggesting is kind of 1 foot in the competency zone and 1 foot in the learning edge. And that way you enlarge your comfort zone almost imperceptibly. It's when you look back you realise just how far you've actually grown. Over time, as introverts, we become more able to put both feet into our learning zone, that fringe, knowing that we can easily retreat when we need to recharge. And what helps that is that sense of psychological safety that I've spoken about before. Now, how do you find your learning edge? How do you find that gap? Well, we know that learning is a fundamental aspect of human development and that we are constantly engaging with new information and experiences throughout our whole lives. However, not all learning experiences are created equal, and different individuals will have different strengths and preferences when it comes to learning. This is where the concept of the learning edge really becomes personal. The idea that we learn best when we are challenged just enough to be outside of our comfort zone, but not so much that we become overwhelmed or disengaged. Knowing our comfort zone is one of the very practical exercises we undertake in readiness for all of my courses, Unfulfilled to Flourishing included. And it's most effective once we know where people want to explore and potentially become proficient. Suffice to say, personal gap analysis is required here because it's going to be different for all of us. No one can do this for us. But we often need someone else's support, guidance and encouragement to venture into what psychologist Lev Vygotsky refers to as the ZPD, the zone of proximal development. This is the difference between what a person can do on their own and what they can do with the assistance from others. This means accepting that we may make better progress by asking for help and support rather than toughing things out on our own. And I know that can be a tough call for introverts. Working with a skilled coach or facilitator who provides this level of challenge can help to stimulate the brain and create the conditions for learning and growth. If the challenge is too easy, the person may become bored and not fully engage with the learning experience. If the challenge is too difficult, the person may become frustrated and give up. Personally, I've been in both of those situations because the facilitator, trainer or coach didn't help me establish where my learning edge or ZPD was. We were just taken through a generic process and told to trust the process. I completely accept this if I buy a relatively low-cost online course. But for real transformational work, we need to know where we're starting from, where we're headed, and what gaps we need to fill in order to get there. Now, if you're on the hunt for your learning edge, it won't be wearing camouflage, but you may not be used to identifying it. So here are some pointers. They take a huge degree of self-awareness and self-observation to get even close, but are well worth it. As I'm running through these, you may want to pause and make some notes or come back to it at another time to do just that. Firstly, how are you when you're thrust into an unfamiliar situation? What do you feel? What do you think? Next, what challenges, opportunities, or situations do you routinely shy away from? These may be the things that your inner critic or limiting beliefs are telling you couldn't possibly do. And I'm asking you to think about how true is that? Next, what situations, challenges, or opportunities do you want to be able to step up to? Now we're into the reality of really starting to create a future for ourselves. Next, what competencies do you have that will help you master this new situation or challenge? There are things that you have learned that you do really well and can consistently execute when you focus. This is conscious competence. Then, what are the things you can do with no real effort that will help you to tackle this new situation, challenge, or opportunity? These are the things inside your comfort zone that typically don't deplete you. And this is unconscious competence. Next, what goal, objective, or intention can you set for this situation, challenge, or opportunity that is beyond what you'd normally set for yourself? This, remember, is about stretching yourself. And lastly, what would stop you from committing to this stretch goal or objective? Now, if we're going to be able to live life consciously and develop personally and professionally, I would suggest, rather than go through life on autopilot, here are a few things you'll need, and you'll recognise I've spoken about them before. Number 1, a growth mindset. I've talked about this many times, and episode 40 was devoted to developing a growth mindset. Number 2, being able to ask for feedback. Episode 140 is a great help here, so go back and listen to that. And thirdly, being willing to apply yourself to active learning. I've said many times that real learning is an active, not a passive process. So what's needed is a healthy dose of curiosity. This curiosity enables us to seek out new information, new experiences, both of which will enable you to improve your knowledge and skills. Then it's about reflecting on what happened, making sense of the experience before planning how to approach something similar in the future. So, back to that question that Mariah asked me last week. What is at my learning edge? Well, it's mastering some new tech that is going to change the way my clients experience my courses, memberships, and free downloadables. I've got skills and ideas from the other platforms I've used. I've got patience and endless curiosity. And as someone who used to write code back in the 80s, it satisfies my inner geek. I love me a bit of tech, and once I've got this mastered, I'll be able to delegate it to someone else who loves it too. Now, where is your learning edge? Do let me know. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.